A shrine, Tiffany.
And let's see, here comes Rory. We are recording.
All right.
L'Oreal. Put that back. Oh, we have a lot of
Hi, Rory.
Hi, hello everyone.
Hey, Rory. G'day, Chris.
How
Hi,
are you?
Rory. Hi, Chris.
Yeah. Hello, Dr. O'Shea, Dr. Brewery, Luke.
nice to see
How
you.
are you, Rory?
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, thanks.
It's good.
It's around a bit here, so it's a pretty hectic morning, but we've made it.
You've done well. Thanks for being here.
I brought a guest. I hope you don't mind.
No, it's fine.
Yes.
I'll call on him for a few expert comments later, Chris.
I wouldn't
As long as he doesn't say too much, we wouldn't want to hear that.
So, Dr. Brewery and Dr. O'Brien, Chris is part of the MRE team that work with Jared and Luke and Tom as well. So he's the fourth. Great to meet you.
Good to see you.
So nice to meet you.
Same.
We have a
So,
couple-
Luke, is it okay if I take notes?
You can take as many notes as you like, Jared, and as I said, you can correct all my heresies at the end.
Oh, I wouldn't wait that long, Luke.
No, I've been guaranteed an uninterrupted 20 minutes, Jared. So
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to mute
Some
myself
things,
here.
some rules are made to be broken.
exactly right. You can chime in whenever you like.
Yes. So, Tiffany, you want us all to mute?
Yes, when we start, that'll be fine. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, Luke, we're waiting on your wife, right? And your sister.
She's usually late, Tiffany, but don't tell her I said that.
I
She'll
am
hear
recording.
it on the recording. Not far away. There's also Dr. Paul Chidwigan from the Wagga Diocese was going to join us.
Fantastic. Okay,
Yep.
we're still a little early, so that's okay.
Sure.
I'm looking ahead.
Yes, they have at least another 60 seconds.
Then our next presentation is April 13th with Tom.
Very good.
Questions ready for that one, Luke?
We wanted to get together, Rory, and
Yeah, I think so.
Jared, how's Anne?
It's very well.
Yeah.
And of course, she's off playing tennis this morning, as people that age do, you know. Young people keep playing tennis, older ones don't.
That's fantastic.
Yes, so we're very busy with grandchildren. We're up to 12 and a half now.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
When's the other half come?
25th of April.
Oh
So
my
that's not a
goodness.
half, it's almost, it's nearly 8 nights, isn't it?
Yes.
Soon. How much fun. I'm so happy for you.
And how have you been, Marita? Haven't seen you for a long time.
Oh, yeah. It's been good. It's been very, very busy here. We've got 2 new undergraduate programs kind of that are within the psychology umbrella that I have been kind of just championing. So kind of fun. One of them is human development and family studies. So specifically more integrating some sociology, but also trying to wrap in some human life studies and help a lot of students who are really not specifically interested in counseling as they are in kind of more direct service positions.
Yes.
So that's exciting. And actually many of them are interested in Montessori and catechesis of the Good Shepherd as part of their training. We just don't have any classes on them. So
Oh, well, you'll have to do something about that, won't you?
Actually, before we start, I just have to say that one of the things that Luke had shared when I reviewed his draft, I was just so excited about the benefits of practical life activities that I was talking with some of my students just about social emotional control and emotional regulation. And I'm like, look, even these simple activities show up. So I showed one of his pie charts, and one of the students said, "What article is that from? Can I pull up that article?" And I said, well, when it gets published, I'm sure that we will be able to share.
There you are, Luke. It's got to be published.
I better get to work then. Still a bit to go.
Nice to see you, Genevieve.
Yeah, you too, Jared. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Mhm.
And thanks for being such a support.
And you too, Tiffany. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, do you want to go ahead and get started, Luke?
Yeah, let's go, Tiffany.
All
That's
right.
fine.
Fantastic. Not to let anyone else in. So welcome. Just a couple housekeeping tips. If you will turn off your mics, but leave on your cameras. The format of this session will be that I will open with a prayer. Luke will present, and then we would like to offer a few words from Dr. O'Shea, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So on behalf of Franciscan University, myself and Dr. O'Brien, we'd like to thank everyone for being here for this presentation of Mr. Burton's research. I'm trying to encourage him to get into a doctoral.
Well, I'm not sure that'll ever happen, Tiffany, but you can keep asking.
The title of his research was The Effect of Practical Life Activities on the Normalization of Children. So let's go ahead and we'll begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for all that you have given us. Thank you for these last 2 years, for the opportunity to be together in community and family, to serve you and serve the church and serve these children in Australia. Lord, please, we ask that you bless Luke and his presentation today. Bless his work and his family. As we enter this Lenten season, help us to find time to listen to you, to reflect, and to grow in our faith, and to grow in our relationship with you. And we do all things in your glory. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, Luke, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Burry. And just a few introductions. I think most people know who we are now on the screen, but just thanks to Dr. Burry for being here as our Director of the Master of Catholic Leadership. And Dr. O'Brien, thanks for accepting the invitation to be here. Dr. O'Brien's an Associate Professor of Psychology at the Franciscan University of Steubenville. So nice to have you with us. Tom McEwen's here, so he's one of my team members in the Diocese of Wilcannia-Forbes. And Tom's the youth minister in our diocese, so a crucial part of our team over the last couple of years. So it's nice to have you here, Tom. Dr. Jared O'Shea, thank you for being here, Jared. Jared's been at a long stint in education, has recently retired, but is as busy as ever. And Jared's been a great mentor to me personally and professionally for a many number of years. So it's nice to have you here, Jared, and thank you for accepting the challenge of offering some expert comments at the end as well. Appreciate that. Chris, thank you for being here. I know you're busy out there in Wilcannia with Rory, so thanks for being here. Another one of the education officers as part of our mission and religious education team. So nice to have you here, Chris, and to Rory as well. We've suffered together, Rory, over the last couple of years through this course, with lots of good things as well. So thanks for being here. My wife, Genevieve, is in a room about 2 rooms that way and tuned in, but I thought she's suffered the pain so she can suffer the joy of the presentation hopefully today. Just thank her for all her support over the last couple of years, because there's no way I would have done it without her help. So I'm just going to share my screen now. As Dr. Burry said, the topic that I've researched is the effect of practical life activities on the normalisation of children. And just a brief outline, it's always good to know where you're going. We run a PD, it's always good to know when the breaks are. You're probably only about 45 minutes from your next coffee. So we'll go through and do just a bit of introduction and give some context to where the research has taken place. Look at we'll spend a bit of time on the key terminology. It's important to know what the terms mean to then actually look at the research and to look at whether it was a success or not. We're going to go through the research rationale, the reasons why I undertook the research. We'll briefly look at literature review, just give a summary of what the literature was saying. We'll look at the research itself. I hope it won't be death by graph, but there is a few graphs there just for us to unpack together. And then finally, we'll look at some implications and recommendations from the research. Just to give you a bit of a context, this research has taken place in the Diocese of Wilcannia-Forbes. You can see there the darker orange on the map of Australia. That's our diocese. It's the ninth largest in Australia. Just for our US colleagues tuning in, it's Montana's 380,832 kilometres squared, so a bit smaller than our actual diocese, just to give you a reference point. You can see there the number of Catholic schools in the diocese, the number of students, and 21% of our students identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. That last point there, I just want to unpack a little bit. Back in 2020, the work started in 2019 with Dr. O'Shea and the team. Prior to my arrival in September 2019, they'd started looking at a new curriculum for the diocese. I arrived in 2019 to take on the role as an education officer in the Mission and Religious Education team. The new curriculum, Educating in Christ, is inspired by the principles and philosophy of education of Maria Montessori, a famous educator. So it's really a hands-on, concrete way of learning about religious education. So we spent a lot of time with saws and drills and hammers, putting materials together in order to launch that curriculum in 2020. Practical life activities are a key part of the Educating in Christ curriculum, and that's the focus of my research today. They're a core part of the Educating in Christ curriculum. Just to give you a bit of a map of the 3 schools that participated. There were 2 teachers from St. Joseph's in Hillston, and then a teacher from each of the other schools within the diocese. I didn't realise until I was putting this slide together that all the schools were named St. Joseph. That was not a purposeful thing that was done, but it was a year of St. Joseph, so maybe he was inspired me to choose those 3 schools. Just going through some key terminology, which will help us in understanding a lot of what I'm talking about today. And the first one is practical life activities. So what are they? They're essentially purposeful activities that simulate the activities involved in everyday life. So it's not actually pretend play, it's things that we would actually do in real life. So things like cleaning, dusting, polishing, especially silverware. Children love doing that. Watering plants, flower arranging, and even, strangely enough, leaf washing. So they're the sorts of activities that are involved in practical life activities. With practical life activities, there's 4 key aspects to it. And the first one there you can see is controlled movement. And this is crucial when we're actually implementing practical life activities in a classroom. The way the child actually uses their hand and is guided by the mind is really important. So the leaves, when they're washing them, aren't done in a really quick fashion and it's done willy-nilly. We teach the kids to really slow down their movements and their purposeful movements that are guided by the mind. So that part of practical life activities is really crucial. The other aspects of practical life are care of the person, the care of the environment that we're in, and also grace and courtesy procedures. Virtue was a part of probably my initial question that I wanted to ask about habituation of virtue. I went with the aspect or the concept of normalization, but virtue is a big part of that. And virtue can be broken down simply to repeated good habits. I think with virtue, it's important to know that it's not just an intellectual principle. It is actually something that it requires an activity. So something that the body does in order to be virtuous. So we can't just think something that's good. We actually need to do something with our bodies in order to be virtuous. Then the final on that slide is Christian anthropology. So we can see that image, the bottom image on that page, is the creation of Eve from the side of Adam. So in Genesis 1:27, we read about the creation of man, the creation of human beings, and we read there that we're created in God's image. So that's really important. It's a Christian understanding of what it means to be a human being And we are that we create in God's image, and we create it as a body and soul that are united. And human beings having obviously an intellect and free will, also. The next one in terms of key terminology, Montessori, according to her, there are two streams of energy in the growing child, and the balanced interplay between those two streams of energy is really crucial. So she spoke about the physical energy of the body, especially the muscular energy, and then she spoke about the mental energy and talked about the intelligence and the will. We might, as Catholics, call that kind of like the spiritual force. Those streams of energy are things that Montessori identified in the growing child. And as I said, the unity of those two streams of energy was something that was crucial to her philosophy, and we'll discover as we work through the presentation today. Normalisation, that term is essentially means that children are developing according to their nature. So developing normally according to their nature. The physical and mental streams that we just spoke about, they're in unison. And Montessori had this beautiful term, she called it a progressive incarnation. So essentially it's a progressive way whereby the body and the soul are brought into unity. And normalisation basically means that children can accept and comply with the norms or the standards of behaviour necessary for communal life. But generally we're talking within a classroom, but also these things can be very relevant for family life also. So Montessori really pushed the idea that normalisation occurs through work. So the passage to normalisation is through the intelligent activity of hand and mind together. She'd always talked about that the hand is a conjoined instrument of the mind, so that what we do with the hand, it's the mind that's guiding what we do. She identified the 4 characteristics you can see on the screen that are a signal that the process of normalisation is actually occurring. The first one of those she had as the key to normalisation, that's concentration. So concentration actually unites the mental and physical streams of energy, which had been in disarray. So children who come in with deviations that we'll talk about shortly, normalisation means that those streams of energy are being brought into unison. And we'll look at how practical life activities can have an impact on that. She talked about competence and independence. The children are competent and independent in what they're doing. And she always said through meaningful work. So they're not just tasks that don't mean anything, they're actually purposeful things that children can do. The next one's the ability to evidence self-discipline and self-regulation. And then finally, and really importantly, there was sociability. And that's the desire of the child to be a responsible and contributing member of the community in which they are part of. I just wanted to add to that list too I guess the virtue of joy. Joy is kind of like the culminating aspect of these activities. And Montessori herself would say that joy pervades a little community like a perfume. So once normalisation has occurred, these things are happening, those 4 aspects, then joy is the ultimate result as well. So we look at the deviations as the last bit, and often we can talk about a deviant child, and we come up with all sorts of pictures in our head of what a deviant child might look like. And I'm sure we've all got our stories of working in classrooms and having deviant children within our classrooms. But another way of looking at that is just saying detours to their development, or even defences. So they're actually defences that children are putting up because normalisation hasn't occurred. And deviations happen as a result of the separation of the 2 streams of energy. And that manifests itself in characteristics that are not generally normal to that child. As I said, the forms of deviations are probably too numerous to mention, and you'd have some pictures of children that you've probably taught that you go, yeah, they definitely had deviations that needed some work. But things like moodiness, disorder, children being timid, lazy, those sorts of things are deviations identified by Montessori. The chart that we've got on the screen here, Montessori used to describe what happens when normalisation occurs. So on the right-hand side of the chart, we see these things that are deviations. So they're behaviours that we just described, like sloth, timidity, disorder, and this caprice, which is essentially children being spasmodic, not being able to control their behaviour. This dotted line in the middle is when normalisation begins to occur. And Montessori, as I said before, said concentration is the key to this normalisation occurring. And once they were concentrated in on a particular meaningful activity, she said these lines on the right of the chart tend to disappear, and these lines on the left of the chart are the ones that are left. So that's kind of her way of saying that through the purposeful use of the hands on a purposeful activity, these lines disappear and you're left with these lines on the other side. So the rationale and the process for the research. So when I arrived in 2019, we implemented the new curriculum in 2020. And as we were travelling around as education officers, we noticed that practical life activities were something that weren't being used as part of the curriculum. They got the other materials up and running, but practical life activities weren't visible in the religious education classrooms we were visiting and working with teachers in. LDR 890, which was a course we had with Dr. O'Brien, which was introductory to research and how that happens. That was really the launching pad for the research I'm doing now. As part of that course, I decided to run some meetings with schools that I was servicing on practical life activities. So I actually bought the materials, I took them into that meeting, talked about the philosophy of practical life activities, why they needed, why they're important, and then actually took the teachers through physically each of the materials in person, and then left the materials there as a gift in their RE classroom. So that was really the launching pad for this research. So as a result of that, teachers really understood what they were about, and they were really enthusiastic about using practical life activities. And there was a real noticeable change in that they were being used as part of the religious education classrooms. I wanted to take that a bit further. I thought, well, children aren't just human beings in the religious education classroom. They're human beings all the time. So why should it just be in religious education that we're giving them these sorts of activities that are essentially assisting them in becoming more human? So I decided to further the research. A little snag that we hit was that COVID was around and we weren't allowed in schools. That's tough for me, as someone who likes to be there and hands-on and working side by side with teachers. I had to take an approach where I was enacting the teachers as agents in the research. So I had initially 5 very generous teachers who accepted the challenge of putting these into their everyday classroom. So children would use practical life activities on a daily basis, as opposed to just twice a week in the RE classroom, to see what impact it would have. One of those teachers couldn't continue with the research, so I ended up with 4 teachers throughout that 6-week period. They had to go out and source all the materials for themselves and put them into their classrooms and to set it up without me being there. So essentially it was a real, probably good step in my leadership as well, just to be able to help them to implement these without me physically being there. And they did a great job, and I'm very appreciative. As part of that remote monitoring and assistance, I had to try to help them. How do you set these things up? At the time, we were filming all of our presentations we use in the Educating in Christ curriculum as training videos for teachers. So we had a bit of a studio set up in our conference room. While the cameras were there, and it might have even been Tom that suggested to me, why don't you do a video? So we went down, I set up all the practical life activities on the table, as you can see in the picture, and I went through each one of them exactly like I would do it, introducing it to the children. And this was sent out to the teachers as part of a support pack to assist them in how they would set them up in their own classrooms. And my thanks goes to Tom for his filming and for the editing of that as well, to assist with getting the research underway. Just really briefly on the literature review, not spending too much time on it, but all of these people that I read through what they had written, there was a consistent anthropology that came through in all of them, and that was that human beings are a body and soul composite. We're not just body or just soul at any particular time. There's always an interplay between the two. And essentially, what each of them was saying, that the construction of the person is through the work of the hand. So we can't just be hitting them in the mind. We need to be giving them practical, purposeful things to do with their hands in order to shape them as a human being. And I think Montessori's quote at the bottom there really sums it up. The use of things shapes man, and man shapes things. I'd just like you to pause and reflect just for a moment. And this is something I asked the teachers who undertook the research to do as part of the pre-survey. But just from what we've spoken about so far, what are your current impressions towards practical life activities and how they might be set up or used within a classroom? And at this point in time, would you consider them as more, less, or as important as academic curricula such as maths, English, and science? You either jot down a note or just keep that in your mind for later down the track. Prior to starting the research, I made a general hypothesis about what might happen. And essentially, through the implementation of practical life activities into the daily operations of the regular classroom, rather than just a bi-weekly RE lessons, the classroom teacher will be able to assist in the process of normalisation of their students. These practical life activities will provide the necessary means for uniting the mental and physical streams of energy in a child, which helps to iron out detours in their development and bring about normalisation. So that was the hypothesis, and we'll move on to look at the research and what came out of it. There was a pre-survey given to teachers, and essentially that was looking at the teacher background, a bit of the demographics of the teachers, asking them about their own practical life experience up to this point and their perceptions towards practical life. It was interesting that all teachers at that point were using practical life as part of the RE classroom, but that was it. And they were asked to identify 2 children each, and they were encouraged to choose their most challenging children. And they did a really good job of doing that as well. They really chose the most challenging children within their classroom. And they had to outline the concerns they had for that child behaviourally or otherwise, what current strategies they were using with that child, and also what goals they had for that child. In the post-survey, we're essentially looking at the teacher perceptions. Had there been a change in their perception towards practical life activities across that time? And to give more specific feedback on each individual child and the impact the activities had had on that child. We can see by this chart, I've just put it together in a table. I had to select and monitor these students. So each teacher chose 2 students that they would monitor across a 6-week period. And the concerns, the challenging behaviours, they're ranging from lack of engagement and motivation right through to, full-blown opposition or defiance disorder. I just want to highlight one of these that we'll follow up a little bit later in the presentation about the impact it had on this child. This child was, he's diagnosed ADHD and oppositional defiance disorder. They regularly disengage when they feel that they're not controlling a situation. They'll become defiant and disruptive with verbal noises and destructive behaviours. He particularly does not like being grouped with those he hasn't chosen himself. Teachers were given, as a support, part of the support package, a student observation sheet. And this was just a way of, standardising the sorts of data that was coming in order to be able to put together some sort of measurement down the track. They were given this standardised observation sheet. There was an example provided, pulled them up the top, as to the sorts of things that they could put in there and what was required. So the importance of choice there, there's a column here that says practical life activity chosen. The teachers were asked to implement practical life activities on a daily basis for a period of 10 minutes. So all children in the classroom were doing practical life activities for that 10 minutes. The children obviously have free choice within that. It wasn't something the teacher said, you're doing leaf washing and you're doing polishing. They were able to choose what they did if it was available to them. That was really important. It was part of that. And then they were encouraged to actually leave the activities there. And if children wanted to use them of their own accord throughout the day, then that was encouraged also. Look at this first graph. It's essentially looking at how many occasions each child was given, or opportunities each child was given to participate in a practical life activity. This is just to show you, the discrepancies in some ways. So student 1 had about 6 opportunities, all the way up to student 5 having close to 40 opportunities across that 6 weeks. So that just gives you a bit of indication of the time involved, and is time a factor in terms of normalisation? Could one child have 5 opportunities? Some have 30. So just in terms of measurement, there were 154 practical life activity opportunities across that 6 weeks. It's fairly self-explanatory. It shows the activity choices the children made across that 6-week period. And it looks at those 4 are fairly even. So leaf washing, dusting, silver polishing and cleaning were very popular choices amongst the children involved in the research across the 6 weeks. And this is in line with what the children themselves said when they were asked to identify their favourite practical life activity at the end of the research period. So let's look to the practical life activity impact And the first chart really looks at, on the student observation sheet, the teachers were asked to identify the demeanour of the child prior to undertaking the practical life activity. And they were just asked to identify that. And, they come up with words like they were frustrated, they were angry. Sometimes they'd be happy or they'd be calm, and that was identified as well. So they weren't always identified in a negative, using a negative word, but majority of the time it was that the child was in a state that wasn't, that they weren't ready for learning per se. You look there that only 5 times there was no change, and sometimes that was because they were happy or calm. But other times there was a time when practical life activity didn't impact the child's demeanour in that time. You can see there that every other time that children participate in the practical life activity, there was a positive result. So 1 was no change, 2 was more calm but still unsettled, 3 was if they were calm and serene after the practical life activity, 4 meant that they actually became cooperative, and 5, they were cooperative and helpful to others. So really looking at that sociability that we spoke about earlier. So you can see there the results of the 154 occasions. Majority of those, there was a positive result. You can see there, more than a third of them were actually a 4 or a 5. So the impact on them was quite drastic. Great to see. In the right-hand graph, I've just circled student 6 because that's the one we spoke about in the beginning, who had ADHD and oppositional defiance disorder amongst many other challenging behaviours. You see that's just dividing up the, the impact of the practical life activities in colour. This is pretty self-evident there. You can see at the top of that column is the blue, which is when that child became cooperative and helpful to others. I think considering that child had such significant behavioural issues, including sociability issues, they just weren't willing to be a part of that community. To have that, I guess it's probably about 5 times up the top that scored a 5, was cooperative and helpful to others, is quite remarkable. And majority of those times there was a real positive result, anywhere from a 2 up to a 5. One thing I was thinking of putting this presentation together is whether time made a difference in the practical life impact. So it might be something for future to look at even that child across the 6 weeks. What sort of scores were they getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5? That's something for the future. These 2 graphs, essentially the one on the left is looking at whether the previously identified concern or behaviour, whether the frequency was the same, less often or more often, or no longer apparent. So it was really pleasing to see that in all cases, with all children, the behaviours identified were actually occurring less often in that short 6-week period. And on the right, you can see there whether the concerns or difficulties were experienced with this child, whether they've changed at all. And majority of the teachers said that there was some improvement. 88% said there was some improvement in the difficulties they were experiencing with that child across that time. So just looking at these post-survey questions, and I won't read these out verbatim, but there was 2 questions that were asked that I really wanted to get from the teachers. And one was whether the practical life activities had made other strategies they used with the child obsolete. Half of the teachers, so 2 out of the 4, actually said that they just complemented what they already had in place. And there was 2 that actually said, yes, practical life activities have actually replaced what I was doing with the children prior to practical life activities. And question 16 was looking at whether the practical life activities have helped them in managing the difficulties or concerns they were experiencing with the child. And really pleasingly, 100% of the teachers responded with an emphatic yes. And just that one comment there that I'll read out. One teacher said, sometimes it sees a drastic change in his behaviour, with him being able to participate more appropriately in activities. So quite pleasing results there as well, the post-survey. I'm just going to give you a minute to read through these for yourself. These were a question on the post-survey about whether the practical life activities had helped the teachers in meeting the goals they had for those children. So just reading through those and thinking back to the definition of the concepts of normalisation and deviations. There might be some things you're seeing there that indicate that normalisation may be taking place. Here's a picture of the students during that 6-week period of undertaking practical life activities. We can see here that leaf washing is one of the favourites, as was indicated in that graph earlier, something they really like to do. I just want you to look at each of those pictures. I'm going to read out some of the comments from the students. They were asked as part of the post survey, which practical life activity they really enjoyed. And most importantly, do they think that practical life activities have helped them? So to be self-reflective about their own demeanour. I'm just going to read out a few of those comments while you look at those concentrating faces. The one student said, I like leaf washing and polishing the most. Polishing is my favourite because I can see what I have done. Yes, they have helped calm me down. Another student said, I like polishing and pencil sharpening. My favourite activity was sharpening the pencils because it was fun. The activities helped me because they are quiet, relaxing and great. Another child said, I've liked doing practical life activities. Watering was my favourite as I was taking care of plants and able to go outside away from the noise. And finally, I like getting to do something before I had to do my work. It was fun washing the plants. I can get some work done now. It was just worthy reflecting on the students' comments there to see how they perceive themselves with those practical life activities. Another opportunity just to pause and reflect quickly. I want you to think about what change, if any, do you think occurred in the teachers' perceptions of practical life activities as a result of this research? And possibly your own change of perception towards them as well, just in terms of this presentation. You see on this slide, the pie chart on the left, it did include the 5 teachers on the pre-survey, with only 4 followed through. You can see there the results of how they viewed practical life activities, and then the post-survey results on the right-hand side. I just wanted to share the comment that this one teacher said, and this one teacher was actually quite sceptical of practical life activities before and sometimes during the research period. She said at the end, there is definitely a place for practical life activities in the school environment beyond the RE classroom. I wouldn't have said that at the start, but I've seen the change and the need for them in some children's lives. To wrap up with some implications and recommendations, there is lots of those, and so I put them on little slides to show that I've thought about lots of these things, but I've just pulled out about 4 or 5 of them to share with you as part of this presentation. Montessori's aim was that without normalisation, a child's real education cannot begin. So my thoughts with that, if Montessori is correct, and a child's real education cannot begin without normalisation, what impact should that have on us as educators in schools? Are we sometimes pushing a barrow, futile manner because normalisation hasn't occurred? I thought future research could look at the practical life activities' impact on academic success. It would be something that would be very interesting to the future. And I think really, really importantly, practical life activities can't be limited to the objective of maintaining discipline and order. So I would hate for people to get the impression that these are behaviour manipulation technique that can be used. That's a byproduct of the process of the children go through with the practical life activities. And I want to share this quote from Gianna Gobbi, who said that these exercises respond to a deep, vital need in the child for order. They give the child a sense of self-mastery and thus self-confidence, calling him or her to repetition of the exercise and to greater concentration. And also important that we don't see this as the formula. And we're dealing with human beings here. It's not that we break them up into these parts and we say, okay, we give this input, this is what's going to happen. That's not going to be the case. That each child is an individual that we can't apply a formula to. And Montessori found this. She had people come from all over the globe to see her in Italy and draw on her wisdom They take them back to their part of the world. And often they'd expect that this would be a miraculous cure, like a silver bullet. I take this back and the children would do it, and automatically the children would be well behaved and they'd be fine. But they found that the children were still running around the classroom and using different practical life implements as planes and cars and all sorts of things like that. And Montessori said that teachers who expected little angels to drop down from heaven were therefore bitterly disappointed. So it does take time with a lot of children as well. And they're not something we should expect, I guess, immediate results with, even though often that is the case. And just something else that was really came through when I was doing the research and the literature, reading through the literature, was what capacity do practical life activities have for putting children in touch with God. And that's a really hard thing to measure, because that's something going on internally for the child. But the comments from children, two of the children, and this was not scripted, they weren't actually prompted to make these comments. This is just what they said on their post-survey. Actually, these were, one first comment was from a teacher who wrote down an observation as they're going through, and the second one was a post-survey comment. So the child could hardly believe his eyes. His polishing was so shiny. He kept saying, wow, wow, wow. Maybe the water makes it special for Jesus. And one of the children on the post-survey said, I like dusting and polishing. I didn't have a favourite. I loved all of it. Practical life activities helped me think about Jesus. They made me feel calm and all happy when everything was so shiny. And I'd just like to leave you with this quote. This is in Standing's book, who wrote a biography on Montessori, and these are her words. When the process of progressive incarnation has been completed, we may, by way of illustration, if we like, think of the soul as a musician playing upon an instrument. The soul with its perfected instrument forms one complete and indivisible whole. So I'd like to finish it up there, and I'll pass back to Dr. Burry to lead the next moderating session.
Thank you, Luke. And I'd like to invite Dr. O'Shea in for some words.
Thank you, Tiffany. Now, could you give me a little bit of guidance as to how long you want me to talk? Because it's entirely possible that I'll go on for longer than Luke. So, give me
Well,
time.
I look across the screen here, and I think you have a audience
8 minutes,
of
Jared.
people that have followed you for so long. So 10 minutes, would that be fine?
10 minutes?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. The first thing I want to say is that I think that this was a magnificent piece of research, a brilliantly chosen topic, something that's incredibly important. I'll tell a brief story. I spent some time in the US about 15 years ago, and I was then being trained in Montessori methods in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And I sat in a group of about 80 people with Rebecca Roykowitz, who's the doyen of Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And one lady got up and complained. She said, I've done everything. I've made all these beautiful materials, and I've got them to have a look at empty tombs and the dioramas and all the rest, and it just seems that they're still not very well behaved. Rebecca's response to that was to go for the woman like a terrier after rats. I wouldn't have liked to have been on the other end of it. She said, I can tell you exactly what you've done wrong. When you brought the children into your atrium in the first place, you spent so much time doing the things that you thought were really interesting that you failed to major on practical life activities. And that's exactly what Luke has told us. And it draws attention to another aspect of what's going on in practical life. We tend not to give students of really young ages the opportunities for these practical life activities. Teachers are notorious, and mothers too, for doing things that are difficult for children so that they don't have to do them. When you do that, you actually diminish their capacity for what we call integral behavior. Montessori's line, progressive incarnation, I just have to say something about that. I would never use it. I know she used it, progressive incarnation, but I would use something else. I'd call it progressive transformation, because at no point is a human being not incarnated, not even from the very moment of their first existence. So well done, Luke, for drawing attention to this. Now, what we're always struggling with in schools, then, I would suggest, is the failure to do practical life at a developmentally appropriate age when it's absolutely simple. I have the opportunity now that I'm retired to take 4 groups of different ages every week for work with catechesis of the Good Shepherd. The most challenging at first is always the 3-year-olds, because they're not expected to be well behaved at home. And so they arrive not being very well behaved in the atrium, but it takes almost no time to get them engaged. And it's very intriguing. I've had them for about 6 weeks. And now, if I break any of the rules, if I walk slightly too fast, they're the ones who call me back. If I go too quickly at picking flowers or washing leaves or polishing, no. All right, so there's my first comment. There's a developmental aspect to this, which if done properly in the first place, is going to have a much greater impact. But unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but it's a challenge to us that children arrive in our classrooms not having had the opportunity of being asked to contribute around the home. That's a problem, and it's becoming a bigger problem. A couple of other stories, if you don't mind, because I think they tell it. I spent some time one day in Burke, one of our more challenging schools. Lovely children, but not easy to deal with all the time. And on this occasion, the school was having a visit from a very important minister in the New South Wales government. And so I went to the principal, John Cowan, and said, "How can I help?" And he said something that surprised me a little. He said, "I'm going to give you 3 kids. Just take them away." And I loved that. What do you think I was going to do with them? Exactly. I took them away, and yes, they looked as if they could climb trees and, jump down and tear kangaroos apart with their fingernails. But I said, "I'm so glad that you're here. I've got a job that I've got to get finished. Would you help me polish up these things here?" And so off they went. And I said, "And the other thing is, we've just had a dust storm here in Burke, which is a common occurrence. All the indoor plants are really dirty. Let's wash them." An hour and a half later, not only were they quite calm, but according to their teacher, they were doing something she'd never seen before. They were getting on well with each other. They were being polite and considerate towards them too. So it's not as if this is something that's unexpected. And Luke went through the whole detail of it. And he explained why it is that practical life activities help integrate the person. Now, if they've missed out on some essential developmental tasks like these in the first place, of course we're going to have problems later on. But as Luke demonstrated, there are really simple ways of reintegrating this. In the 13th century, Western culture was fortunate to have the work of St. Thomas Aquinas, who for the first time put forward the view that has remained certainly part of Catholicism ever since. Prior to that, the church tended to think that the more important thing in human life was our connection with God. If we got that right, everything else would be fine. Thomas Aquinas was the one who said, well, no, we haven't been created as angels. We've been created as human beings. And there are not two truths, divine truth and natural truth. They coincide with one another. And so he pointed to the fact that one of the key things that we have to do in education is to seek the reintegration of dissolute faculties, deviations, as Maria Montessori called them. And I think Luke brought that out beautifully. This calming effect that all of these things have, leading to joy. Maria Montessori didn't ultimately define joy, but St. Thomas Aquinas did. He said that joy is the natural result of our encounter with beauty. And he went on to define beauty as the harmony of all things that we see in their proper order. So when you see joy in a student who's been able to have practical life activities and allow them to open up to everything else they're going to do, everything follows. It's this astonishing integration that takes place, the integration of the true, the beautiful, and the good. Oh goodness, you said so much, Luke, that I'd love to comment on. But one of the things I love best was your focus on the fact that these are not manipulation techniques. What we're trying to do is actually to attend to the needs of the students, to make them more human. And they're not created as monsters. That's not their destiny. If things have gone wrong in their lives, we're there to help them reintegrate. And so when you hear the words normalization of the deviant child, it's perhaps old-fashioned language, and it gives the wrong impression where, here's a mold and we're going to push you into it. No. Here is what you have been created for, and here is how we're going to bring it about to help you. The last point you made, putting children in touch with God. It was St. Thomas Aquinas, following the entire tradition of Western philosophical culture, starting with Heraclitus and going through Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who believed that human beings were capable of something more. Typically, the way a human being learns is through discursive processes, comparing, remembering, putting things together. All of that is natural human activity and can be observed. But all of those philosophers, St. Thomas Aquinas, and more recently, Joseph Pieper, the great German philosopher, said, we all understand that there is something more in a human being, which Thomas Aquinas called the simplex intuitus, whereby we know things, where it's revealed to us as a landscape is revealed to the eye. And to put it in the words of Pieper, we appear in some aspects of our life to be able to participate in the knowledge of higher beings. That's what we're giving those children. That's why they can come up with those brilliant ideas as they calm themselves down. And that's 10 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful summary. Thank you. So I'll open the floor now for questions for Luke.
Sorry to come back again, Luke. Did the teachers have any sense that what you were giving them in practical life had a developmental aspect to it? That, if you do it early, it's going to have greater effect and be more stable in their development.
I think they did, Jared. There was really a discussion that was had with the teachers around it. If children have missed out, as you just pointed out, they've missed out on these really crucial things they should have done early in life, then it's going to be harder to turn that around, and they were aware of that. Yeah.
Luke, did you have any parent comments afterwards, where the parents come back and have conversations with the teachers? Did any of them become involved in this?
They didn't, Dr. Burry, and they probably weren't involved as part of the research. It was really I guess the kids were kept anonymous. The fact that I wasn't visiting schools, we essentially just gave the children just their initials so I could identify and track them from pre to post survey. But I guess if the teachers didn't let the parents know that it was happening, then the parents didn't know it was happening. They just did it as part of their everyday work in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I had a similar question as well. As I was, I was just noticing that I think that was, again, very clever, Luke, that you asked the teachers to identify some of the more challenging students. And maybe I missed this, but was there any sense of how with those children that were typically more difficult, typically taking more of the attention from the teachers, that there was any effect on the other students? Or I guess the other students also had access to the practical life activities. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it was set up in that way. Probably not something I would normally do, but we had to get it up and running. So if we actually stipulate there is a time that you must do them, the 10 minutes a day, it actually made the teachers accountable to doing it. I think if I had gone with the thing of just have them there, and if the children choose to use them, go for it, it just wouldn't have happened. So I was really just stipulating the whole class activity to start with. And then you notice is when I was going through the results that those children that were being observed, and I presume other children too, would actually seek out the practical life activities. I've got stories from the teachers of, having a fight at the lunch club, coming in really hot and a bit hot under the collar and needing to calm down and asking, can I please go into a practical life activity? And then once they've done that, they've washed the leaves or they've polished the silver, they're then able to just come back and they're okay. And they're able to get on with their afternoon. So it was really great stories from that point of view too.
Luke, Sandra Harvey here from Wagga.
Sandra, we've emailed each other, but haven't seen you yet.
Yeah,
Nice to see you.
yeah. So nice to see you on screen and nice to see everyone else. Luke, I just have a question around Indigenous students, because you've got 21% of your population in Wilcannia Ports are Indigenous students. Did you notice any difference for those students, given that they wouldn't be necessarily practical life in their own home experiences? Did that make a difference to the results?
Sandra, the children that were chosen were not of Indigenous background, so I couldn't comment on that in terms of whether there was a difference to them. What I do know is that through our work in the diocese, and Jared would probably be able to back this up, that Aboriginal children have an incredible ability for inspiration, to actually be put in touch with their environment, their surrounds, and to be open to listening to God. But yeah, I couldn't. There was no comparison made in this research.
Thank you.
Could I say something about that, Luke?
Yes.
The story I told about the 3 children in Burke, all of those children were Indigenous. And so that is what I've found, that if you give them something practical to do, they are much more cooperative with you and actually enjoy it a great deal.
Yeah, I wondered whether that was the case, so hence the question. Yeah. Thank you, Jared.
Thanks, Sandra.
Luke, well done, mate. It was, really interesting. I did have a question. I really liked how you pointed out the developmental need for order, and how that, that's probably what's really missing for a lot of children. But what I was wondering was, are there particular practical life activities that are more appropriate for certain age groups? When you looked at the suggestions you had, are they all from kindergarten to year 6, or as the children get older, are there different practical life activities that you would target more developmentally?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Tom, and I would have to be honest that the research didn't look at that aspect. It didn't look at which practical life activities were the older children drawn to and which one were the young ones. I do know, just looking through, that the activity choices that were, I guess, in that pie chart, looking at leaf washing and silver polishing, all children seem to enjoy those activities. And I think if they haven't had something before, Tom, it does it does have an impact, and we find that even with the rest of our Educating in Christ curriculum. So if the concrete materials, they haven't had that experience of concrete, they're actually drawn to it. So I'd say that would be the same practical life. One thing I think is really important in practical life is where they're actually learning to become a part of that community. And I know one of the teachers commented that their classroom had never been as tidy and ordered, especially for term 4, because of the work that the children were doing in keeping that environment tidy. She just looked around and got everything's where it needs to be. So it's a very ordered environment, which naturally would not just impact that child, but all children, because we all have that need for order. There were things that I suggested outside of what was on that pie chart, and things such as preparing materials for the class, so cutting out things for the junior classes that they needed to use for collages and stuff as part of the curriculum. So they were things where older children, I noticed that they were activities they tended to choose as well, because they were then contributing to a younger class group and really the whole school community in that manner.
Thanks.
I add something to that. Sorry for jumping in, but I'm currently using an experimental group of adolescents, teenagers in these methods. And about 1/3 of what I do with them in any session that I have is practical life. And the typical activities they absolutely are drawn to in practical life, they have a choice, but they're mostly drawn to construction, woodwork, making paper mache tombs for an atrium we're having, cutting up the pieces of wood we need for sheep and a sheepfold, and gardening. The experiment is ongoing and we'll discover more things, but they too have a need for practical life, but they always want to do it with each other, as distinct from what the younger children do.
As you know, that was the age group I was referring to, I think. Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Drew.
Hi, Luke. Rory here. First of
Hi,
all,
Rory.
congratulations. Well done.
Thank you.
I was having a question surrounding the 10 minutes. Was that at a designated time? So was it in maths or, say, after lunch every day? Or was it at the teacher's discretion when they would use that 10 minutes for practical life?
Yeah, it was teacher discretion, Rory, where it fitted in with them. So I needed to make sure that I wasn't being too much of a dictator, because they were doing me a big favour in actually taking this on for me as a project. So I did allow them to choose that 10 minutes, but most would actually put it in that after lunch slot, which we know can be a bit of a tricky time.
Great. Thanks, Luke.
Do we have any other questions or comments for Luke? No? All right. Well, on
I
behalf
just
of
want to say that this should be published, Luke. You have to write an article and you have to make it available to the world.
Thanks, Jared.
If you need any help, I'm sure Dr. Burry will help you. And I will too.
You're
Yeah.
retired, but I know where you live, Jared. So
Can I just make one more
Please.
comment that actually kind of something that Jared said, and I guess Tom was asking about, is at Franciscan, we've just started this Catholic Agrarian Club, kind of a community garden. And I've just started advising. And it's like several students were like, oh yeah, I just saw the Agrarian Club. Oh, they just built a shed. Oh, they just started getting tools. So like the kinds of things you're talking about, there's something about it that I think is real. And, even your comment just now about how this is something that the teachers have probably done kind of after the lunch break, because we just resumed from spring break. And I was thinking in one of my classes yesterday, I should have been doing some practical life activities before we started with the lesson as well. So, yeah.
very true. They're good for everyone, Dr. O'Brien. And it was really interesting, just a story from one of the schools where practical life activities were being undertaken in a Year 1-2 classroom. And one of the teacher aides walked in, and she walked in with a bit of a look on her face of what on earth is going on here. She goes, why are they washing leaves and doing all that sort of stuff? Shouldn't they be doing RE? I said, I just explained what practical life activities were and the impact they were having on the children and why they were necessary. And she goes, yeah, you know what? I actually really like cleaning my house. I said, yeah. She goes, when I've cleaned it all and I've got it all done, the vacuuming's done, the mopping and everything, she goes, I get a real sense of, I thought she'd say something like accomplishment or satisfaction. And she said joy, which is really interesting. So they're not just for children. I think adults have that need as well as, you know, to be fully integrated human beings.
You know, I think that's a really good comment too that you make about joy. All of us are educators, and especially most of us have worked with children, and we see how exhausting it is for a young child to go through their day and to not fit in, to be yelled at, to just feel like everything they're doing is like chaos. So how nice to be able to shift that and to have them see themselves differently and to have that feeling of joy and to increase that through something like this that is so accessible to everyone. You know, it's just putting in the time and the effort to learn the steps. So Luke, really great work.
And just probably the final one on that, Tiffany said that they come in exhausted. Montessori would actually say that practical life activities energize children because we're uniting the mental and physical streams of energy. When they're in disarray, there tends to be that sort of deviation from the normal, but she found they actually energize children.
Well, definitely. Thank you. Well, I bet you're feeling relieved.
Very relieved.
At Franciscan University, we'd say your sandals are dirty in honor of St. Francis. All of you from Australia. Dr. O'Shea, I'd like to just thank you so much for encouraging these men to be part of our program. And just really, the work they've all done in their research is incredible. All should be published. And it's been a real honor, I know, for Dr. O'Brien and myself to work with everyone and to learn more about your culture and your community and your country. It's just, it'll always be a highlight of my career. So thank you for that.
And Tiffany, thank you so much for allowing us to be part of that. It was not easy to get it into your program, but you bent over backwards to make it happen. So we're grateful too.
Well, thank you. And I have to say that I noticed, I think we have Dr. Roberts on here as well. So on behalf of Dr. Roberts as well. So we are so grateful. All right, well, this concludes Luke's research. So Luke, congratulations. Well done.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much. Thanks for your support, Jared and all the team as well. Tom and Rory, we've gone through it together a couple of years. So looking forward to Tom's presentation in a few weeks' time. But thanks everyone for joining and for your time today. I hope you found it somewhat interesting. You can take something into your own workplace and your own lives as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dr. O'Brien. See you later.
Bye.
Luke, you want to stay on? Genevieve, you want to stay on?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop the recording.